Bruce Wayne again with one of my amazing stories. So what I want to talk to you about today is bullying and being bullied. I know that's been in and out of the news, but my take on it is a little different. I probably have three primary stories that I want to share with you, but throughout my life I've always fought the bully and have actually spent a lot of my time defending other people from the bully. And my first encounter was back in, I think, the 4th grade, where this guy, his name was Rupert, and he was, I don't know what his story was, but it seemed like he came from a very abusive household because I remember him taking off his belt and going around and whipping all the other kids with the belt. He had scratches all over his face. He looked like he'd been through some scrapes over time. And I remember that he actually carried a knife, and he was new in our school. He was a new student, and he was trying to intimidate everyone, and everybody was scared of him, but I was not scared of him. I came from 4 boys in the family, and living up in Rock Hall at the time. And so, I was fearless at the time. And so when he decided to come my way and thought he was going to bully me, I remember getting in a fight. I don't know what happened, but we were in a fight. And I remember we were on the 2nd floor. And this is at Independence City All-Age School in Kingston, in St. Catherine, actually, Portmore, St. Catherine. And I remember us fighting, and I remember, he thought I was going to be scared of the knife, and somehow we got in a struggle, and we ended up leaning over the balcony on the 2nd floor. And he's like, well, I'm going to throw you over there, and I grabbed him, and I said, well, if you go, I go. And, of course, I didn't learn about gravity or the consequences at that point. It just goes to show that when you're young, and your brain is not fully formed. They say your brain is not fully formed until in your late 20s. And so you didn't think of the consequences, and I certainly did not. But I just thought that, look, you know what? If we're going to go, we're going to go. And it scared him, and he backed off. And that's how that situation happened. The other person that I got in fights with was a kid that was named Leopold. And Leopold, every lunchtime, he and I would get in a fight. We would constantly fight. It was like ding, 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 lunchtime, and we'd go out and fight each other. And neither one of us would really win, but we were always trying. And so eventually we sort of just gave up and became friends. And that was my first experience in making a so-called enemy into a friend. And it happened throughout my life that many times that I fought the bully, I ended up actually bonding with them as a child and even as an adult. And I think that's why sometimes when I think psychologists look at bullying and they don't allow boys to sort of be boys a little bit, I always rely on my experience and say that, look, it's a coming of age thing, and some of it, even though it can feel very violent, actually can result in some sort of friendship. But let me tell you about one that didn't result in friendship. I was also in, I think, the 5th grade at the time, and I don't remember what happened, but typically, when I'm on the evening shift coming from school late in the evening, I'd get out and jump on the bus to make my journey all the way back to Rock Hall. But in this case, I was actually living with my aunt because we had moved on from that point from Rock Hall, and I was living with my aunt and my Uncle Clive in Bridgeport. And when I remember that this girl, which I don't remember her name, but I do remember that it was late evening and I was getting ready to leave school. And right at the gate, she was standing there, and I don't remember how we got into a fight, but I do remember that she had 2 of her boy or male friends grab my arm, and she grabbed a stick and she beat the hell out of me with it, and there was nothing I could do about it. And so I was absolutely angry because it was not a fair fight, and so I went home because I was angry that they basically jumped me. And so I went home, and I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I went and I got a steel pipe. Back in the day, they used to make plumbing with really solid, especially the part of the faucet that actually connect where you screw your hose onto. That tend to be a very solid piece of metal. And I remember grabbing a steel piece of pipe that, small, so I think it was like about this long. And I took it and I put it in, wrapped it up and put it in my book bag. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not gonna use it unless I'm forced to use it, unless she attacks me. And so when I got there in the morning, I was very surprised that when I got there, she was standing at the gate again. And this time, and she had a stick in her hand because she wanted to repeat the same thing. And I kind of held back for a little bit, but when she started hitting me with the stick, I reached into my book bag and I pull out this piece of metal and I hit her over the head. And in that moment, all I remember is blood everywhere. And back in those days, the students would, I remember the students gathering around me and go, oh, we're taken to the principal's office. The principal name at the time was Mr. Smalls. And they were all going to take me to Mr. Smalls' office. And, what that meant is that, well, I was going to get a whipping. I was going to get caned in Mr. Smalls' office. But back then I was a little bit cocky, and so I decided, no, I don't need for you guys to escort me to the principal's office. I'll simply I'm on my way there. I'm willing to deal with the consequences. Well, it's one of those things when you think you're ready for something versus when it actually happened. So when I got there, Mr. Small, my God, he came the living hell out of me. He stopped. He went and he sipped a cup of tea, and I thought he was going to come back for a second time around. And he just sat me in a corner, and I was thinking, oh my God, this guy's coming back for seconds. But instead what he did was he called my aunt Barbara, who was also a teacher. She was teaching the 3rd grade still at that time. And she came down and she got me. And then I guess she must have left for the rest of the day because she drove me home and then told me to go in the room and sit in the corner while she thought about what to do with me. And while she was driving home, my aunt Barbara had this knack. She didn't have to hit you, and I don't remember her beating me at all. But what I do remember is her ability to be able to talk to me in such a way that it would make you feel so terrible that you'd rather take a whipping than actually listen to her, because she made you understand the consequences of what you did. And so when she took me home, I thought I was going to get in trouble for it, but I was grounded for it, so I couldn't go out and play. But she never beat me, for it, which I was very surprised by. And one of the things I learned from that is and I kind of took that with me, and there was a couple other situations that helped me to reinforce the behavior. The behavior I'm talking about is sometimes you are thinking you're in control of a situation. And so you go with an intent to say, well, I'm not going to do anything. But the problem is that when you get there, they say the greatest thing that can affect your life is something that you don't have control over, is external force. And in this particular case, the external force was this girl who decided she was going to attack me again, and also all the things that transpired that I did not have control over. So if I had to give you one message, the message would be, if you think you might get into a situation where it could get out of hand, your best choice is to try to avoid it at all costs. Because going there thinking that you're going to control the situation, it might not work, and it typically will not work, because the person is not going to do many times what you think they're going to do. Now, the next bullying that I remember was when I got in the 5th grade, you are allowed to take what's called the Common Entrance Exam in Jamaica. It's based on the British system. And what the Common Entrance Exam is, it determines whether or not you're going to go to secondary school, which essentially is a trade school, so you learn a trade, or you're going to go onward to what's called much more of an academic route, which is where you go to high school. And high school back then was the more prestigious choices to make. People, when their child went to high school, it was a big deal. And education in Jamaica was really held in high regard. And mothers and parents and families would pride themselves in the fact of how smart their kid was and which high school that they attended. And so when I took the common entrance exam, I passed it and I attended KC, Kingston College, which is located in Kingston, Jamaica. And KC was what you considered an Ivy League high school in Jamaica. It was one of the few very top tier school. It was famous for sports and academic. It had a nice mix. Some schools were famous because of their academics. Some of them were famous because of the sports. But KC was one of the few schools that were famous for both. And back then, when you go to KC, one of the things is that all across the school system, the government would give you khaki, the cloth. They'd give you a roll of it. And what you would do is they'd give it to you for free, but then you would go back home, and then you would hire a tailor to make your school uniform. And they were very specific about how they wanted you to design your school uniform. And what was interesting is, just off a tangent a little bit, one of the things that's interesting about it is, until I came to the United States, all of my clothes were tailor-made. And so and I remember the first time I went to a department store in Jamaica and I saw the clothes on the rack when my Aunt Barbara took me. And it was just a very strange thing. And I think I picked up a shirt or something on a hanger and I looked at it, and it was just, I was thinking, why would anybody want to buy clothes that did not fit them? That was not made for them. I find it fascinating today that most of us get our clothes off the rack, and very few people actually have tailor-made clothes, and it's held in very high regards. But for some of my Indian clients and friends, when they go back to India, they also get their clothes tailor-made as well. So it's not as unusual, but I think it's sort of a fascinating sidebar. So when I went to KC, Kingston College, I attended in the, first time I failed the common entrance exam in the 5th grade. And so if I passed, I'd go straight to high school. But I failed it the first time. I cried about it. I studied hard. And the second time I actually passed. And so I had started going to KC in the 6th or 7th grade. I forgot I think you finished the 6th grade, and then I went on to the 7th grade for KC. And when I got there, things were great. So KC wore, everybody in Jamaica know what I'm talking about. KC wears a purple and white tie, and they have these epaulets, these purple epaulets that's on your shoulder on each side. Sort of like the way you see in those dictator movies, you got those epaulets. Okay, and your uniform was khaki, and you had to wear black shoes. I think it was black shoes at the time. But you had to be impeccably dressed. Your clothes had to be ironed, starched, and there was an inspection when you came in to school that they literally stopped and inspected you like the military to make sure that your clothes fit you really well, and your shirt is tucked into your pants. And if you came in disheveled, you can get sent to the principal office, and that meant you're going to get caned. So corporal punishment was a big part of maintaining discipline and order. So you didn't want to get caned for that, and you had to make sure your hair was perfectly cut. Everything was manicured about you because KC had a very high standard. And so in the classroom, I remember one of the things also that carried over is that the teacher, beatings were less common in high school, but you'd still get a beating up until the 9th grade. After the 9th grade, then the teachers would not beat you anymore. But so therefore, in the 7th, 8th, and I think up until the 9th, it might be, I can't remember if it's the 8th or 9th grade that they stopped caning you. But I remember being in the classroom and the teacher, you always had to study and make sure you're on top of things, because if not, you're going to get beaten. And so I remember there was a kid by the name of George Sanders. And George Sanders was somebody who bullied me. And we got in a fight all the time. He was a heavy-set kid. He was clearly overweight. And so he was much bigger than I was at the time. And it didn't matter how much I fought, I could never seem to win. So there's a difference, I think, in just being bullied and just sitting there and crying. That was not what was happening. I always tried. But no matter how I tried, this guy always got the upper hand. In fact, I remember once when I actually, we got into it, and then I hit him, and then I ran, and then he threw his bag, and his bag tied up my, what's the odds of a book bag getting you right around your ankles and tying up your legs? Well, the 1 in a million shot, he got me, and I fell to the ground, and then he laughed at me. And so, it was like a riddle that I couldn't solve. But then eventually, one day, I actually, we got into it, and I hauled off as hard as I could, and I punched him in the face. And then there was a slight pause. And then he started crying. And I was like in shock, because I didn't think this kid was capable of crying. And when he started crying, I started crying. And I started crying because I was just I was surprised that this kid had any sort of emotion like that. And then after that, something very funny that happened. We became friends. And even until I left Jamaica, we were friends. And what was interesting about that at the time was, even during that time, we were not really paying attention. George and I were not really paying attention in school. I think part of, for me, there was a little bit of a disconnect about being in school at the time. I cannot explain it, but I remember bringing home my report card at the end of the 7th grade, and I'd failed every single subject. And of course, there was a lot that was going on at home, in my living arrangements at home with Uncle Clive and the abuse, etc. I'm not sure, I don't know really how to explain it, but I lost interest in school. And interestingly enough, I always loved school, and when I was in school, I always did well in school. I always excelled. But this is the first time that I got horrible grades, and I had to actually repeat the grade. It was probably one of the most humiliating experiences I've ever had happen as a child. And to this day, I remember it. And so I remember George and I actually stayed back while everybody else moved on to the 8th grade. And because of that, we studied so hard. And because of that, we actually got an award for most improved student, etc. And I left Jamaica before I could pick up the award, but that was sort of the outcome of that. So that's my story of bullying that I'd like to share with you. The moral of the story is sometimes, you really just need to avoid that situation at all costs. But also, to parents, sometimes your child getting into a fight, especially your boys, does not necessarily mean that you need to be involved in such a way of calling the lawyer, etc. Sometimes kids, especially boys, need to go through that time and go through that experience and learn how to deal with conflict and how to resolve conflicts and how to build relationship, and also learn about their vulnerabilities. And just like with George Saunders, it was a riddle to solve. And while I got lucky solving it, in real life, sometimes when you have a problem, that is a riddle to solve as well. And you have to learn how to solve it, as long as it doesn't involve the kid going home and getting daddy's gun and shooting someone, or me going home and getting a metal pipe and using, that kind of weaponry there, So that's my takeaway. I guess I'm in no position to tell parents what to do. I'm not a psychologist, but I'm just going to tell you what my experiences are. Thank you so much for listening to my stories. Also, if you have a story of your own, I'd recommend that you write into me. Send me a video or write a letter telling me the story. Not your whole life story, I can't read it on the air. But if you send me maybe just a short letter or something I can read pretty quickly about something that has happened to you in your life that's interesting as well, that you'd like to share, I'll read it to the audience. Thank you so much and enjoy your day.